Cohere, Perspective from the Pines, a conversation series from Green Acre, which is a Bahá'í center of learning here in Elliott, Maine. The verb cohere means to be united, to form a whole. And part of Green Acre's mission for over 100 years has been to learn how to elevate the discourse around themes of justice, nobility, that inherent sense of worth for every human being, resilience, and of course, the oneness of humanity. Under normal conditions, we'd be gathering people together to have these conversations, but we've been sort of given the opportunity to bring these conversations online. My name is Robert Sapiro. I'm the administrator at Green Acre, and I'm here with my colleague, Claudia Matarel, our outreach coordinator, and she'll introduce our theme and our guest for this episode.
Hello, everyone. I'm Claudia, and I am also very happy to be here and continue the conversations we've been having for, we've had about 5 episodes already, and it's exciting to continue this conversation on constructive resilience. And we have the bounty to have JerriAnne Boggis with us today from the Black Heritage Trail. She's the executive director of the Black Heritage Trail of New Hampshire, which has been a very fundamental organization in the area, in the Seacoast, specifically in New Hampshire, discovering all the different, the realities of Black people in the community and bringing it about. And JerriAnne, thank you so much for being with us today. It's such a pleasure to have you and to, for you to shave off a little time of your very busy schedule to have this conversation with us.
Thank you so much for having me, Claudia. It's my pleasure to be here to talk about the Black Heritage Trail of New Hampshire and the work that we're doing in recovering some of these lost stories, the lost, forgotten stories of African and African Americans in New Hampshire. It's a great opportunity to show the resilience of this group of people that we raise awareness for, and just their integral part of being part of the fabric of New Hampshire, not just forgotten stories. So the Black Heritage Trail of New Hampshire, we're in our 4th year, okay. But we're an outgrowth from the Portsmouth Black Heritage Trail, which is in its 25th year. So from the work of Valerie Cunningham, doing a lot of recovery of the work in Portsmouth, really including those hidden voices in Portsmouth's story. She collected a lot more information across the state. And so the Black Heritage Trail worked on, gathered on the information she had gathered and decided that this was not just a Portsmouth story, but a New Hampshire story, because what was happening in Portsmouth was also happening in Concord, in Exeter, in Warner, in Keene, in Plymouth, and on, right to all these little hamlets in New Hampshire. They were Black stories. The Black Heritage Trail really retelling these stories, or bringing them to our awareness, bringing them to the forefront of the dialogue, especially now when race and racism seems to be dividing us, and we're getting to the polar end of these issues, that these stories of survival shows that we have this deep-rooted history of resilience, of creating, of surviving, of living, of doing ordinary and extraordinary things.
Absolutely. Wow.
So so rebuilding these stories is I wouldn't say rebuilding, re-entering them into our consciousness, into our community's consciousness, into our environment conscious, is a part of constructing resilience, because they were there, they were built up. There was a time when you could go through the different town histories, and there would be mentions of people. In Milford, Blanchard was, Mr. Blanchard, George Blanchard was mentioned in the early history of the town as the first veterinarian in the town, and he was also a Revolutionary War vet. The next writing of the history said that there were no veterinarians in the town until this other person came along who happened to be white.
Wow.
You know? So we know this, the reconstructing, rebuilding, re-examining that history is constructive resilience. It's there. You know, stories were there.
Yeah.
And we don't have to construct those stories. You know, we just have to flesh them out and bring them to our attention, you know, and include them in our history. And so that we have these multiple voices, you know, telling the story that is America, not this single voice that tells the mythological story of America, you know?
Yes.
So I think if we always, because we want to be truth to the ideals and saying that, you know, all men were created equal, you know, we can all rise to, you know, we can all do anything, even even the oppressed, even though there are laws that are set to disenfranchise a group of people throughout our history, even though the stigma of racism and the real deeply held belief that some Americans have for African Americans is that they are not as smart as, they're not as good. And when we look at these other stories, you know, of these enslaved people in New Hampshire, or the stories of free Blacks recently out of enslavement, building homes, creating businesses, writing novels, you know, being master musicians, being builders. All of these things are just like any other settlers were doing here in New Hampshire at the time, right? Trying to be good citizens in their town where they landed. Yeah, I think of the term bloom where you're planted often when I think of the enslaved being here, working really hard to create a life for themselves and their families. So to me, that's resilience. I was on Facebook today and there was a protest, you know, the people are protesting the reopening of businesses in their town. And a woman had the sign that the only person who should wear masks are dogs and slaves. And, you know, to look at that, to read that sign in 2020 tells me that we haven't moved that much from the 1700s. We had to vilify a whole race of people for us to be comfortable, and I'll take myself out of that, but for America to be comfortable with the history of enslavement. So we had to animalize human beings in order to sleep well with our animalistic treatments of human beings. So that way our consciousness can be clear, conscious can be clear. So bringing these stories and raising these really hard truths that we have to look at is constructive resilience. Because when you look at things like that, you have to say, how did they even get up in the morning? You know, how did an enslaved person get up when the person who bought them believes that they are less than human and treat them each and every day as they're less than human? You know? So each story that we share, each story of survival, each story of creativity, each story of, you know, Black folks doing, you know, the 1779 petition, 20 Black men from Africa signed a petition, just like the country was doing at that time, for their freedom. You know, the white America was writing for their freedom from the British and enslaved men were writing for their freedom from enslavement and using the same language that the founding fathers used to argue for their freedom. When you think of that, that's powerful. That's resilience. That's humanness desire to be free. Right? And yet the mythology is that Black folks were not intelligent, they couldn't write, they couldn't read, they didn't have the sense to think and to be logical, that their position in a household was that of the enslaved.
For me, it was helpful to understand the importance of the trail when I started hearing what the mission of the trail was to bring about bring about the stories of people of color, especially Black people in this area. And that it touched me too when you said that I say it all the time that, Maine it's a white state and New Hampshire is such a white state, but then that alone erases the history, when I say that. So I'm definitely going to be more mindful of the fact that, of how I word those things and say, yes, there's a bunch, there's a bunch of white people out there, but there is also a rich, history of Black people who have been resilient throughout the years and have been surviving and have been thriving and creating and trying to make a new way of life for themselves in a place where their history is erased. And so I think that talks to the power of language and how we say things as well. So that our language doesn't erase the entire history and liveliness of a group of people.
Yeah, the language is really subtle, but so important in what we remember and what we choose to forget. I was thinking again of George Blanchard in Milford in the new writing, the most recent writing of the history, where his occupation as a Revolutionary War vet was erased. There was also, he bought property downtown. He had a business that was in downtown Milford. And the rewriting said that Blanchard somehow came by this property. Somehow came by this property. Now, when you do the research, there is a deed. It show he bought it. It show who he bought it from. And I know the person who was chronicling that history knew of the deeds, because she's writing history, so it's clear. It says that he bought the property. It has the deed number. It says how much he bought it for, when he bought it, and who he bought it from. But in the writing and the telling of the story, it's he somehow came by this property.
Wow.
Right? So we're reinforcing these notions. Well, what did he do? Did he steal it? How did he get it?
Right.
That's
The
a
language,
mystery. A Black man bought property in Milford, New Hampshire in the 1800s. Oh my God, how did that happen?
Yeah.
So that's telling how we tell the story, the words we choose to tell the story reinforces or breaks those stereotypes.
Yes.
So we at the Black Heritage Trail, we're not hiding the truth. We're just telling the stories as much as we know and as much as we can find out. And the pure, unvarnished truth is what we have to look at in understanding where we are, where we were, where we are, and where we can be. If we look at our history truthfully, first of all, we have to admit that we enslaved human beings, that we treated human beings like animals in the most torturous ways that we could possibly think of. We look at other countries and we say today, how could they do this? How could that happen? How could their leaders, how could their people follow? We're right there right now. We were there in enslavement. We're right here, right now again, and choosing to put blinders on to not see where we are. I think I remember really strongly Maya Angelou at one of her events that I had gone to, and she says that each morning it's human. She calls it human natures, and she says, "There for the grace of God go I. There for the grace of God go I." That I could be that person who we are humans, capable of great evil and capable of great good. So there for the grace of God go I. How do I get to be that human being that walks on that side of awareness and truth, and not on that side of being pure evil? It's a choice we make. And I don't think we live in even back then, we always say that, it was the time and everybody was participating in enslaving Africans. And that's an accuse. It was the time, they didn't know better. But we know how we're treating people.
Yes.
No matter what happens, we know when we are mistreating someone. We know when we're being mean. We know when we're being evil. We know when we're hurting somebody. When we take that whip and lash somebody's back open and the blood flows, we know that we're inflicting pain. When a group of Americans gather to watch a lynching, they know what they're watching. They bring their kids to watch this lynching. They know what they're doing. So that's just an excuse. We as human beings have that choice. What side do we want to walk on? And do we vilify other human being to make our choice right?
Right. And I think also making the right choice from the oppressed perspective is such a revolutionary act. When you were talking about what Maya Angelou was saying, what is it, therefore go I?
There for the grace of God go I.
There for the grace of God go I. So like you're still choosing to make the right decision and to like take the right path when you could easily not do that. And you be, in a way, some could say, yeah, that's totally fine because they've been oppressed for so long and it's okay for them to retaliate. But she's saying they're still trying to decide what's the right path and how to bring about justice in the right way.
Absolutely.
And I think that's the revolutionary act.
That's the revolutionary in its own way. Even thinking,
yes,
for the grace of God go I, just that thinking allows us to recognize the human in us.
The work of the Black Heritage Trail has been so powerful for me, having moved back to I grew up in Portland, Maine. So, and I had certain notions about what the state of Maine was, and, this idea of it being all white or being, just the various myths about not really being involved in slavery and all these kinds of concepts. And, as I learned more and lived other places, and that changed, but then coming back and seeing how the Black Heritage Trail sort of continues to really further that conversation so clearly about where we actually are and what the history really was. And I feel like that opens up the conversation in the present moment so we can recognize the hard truths of now and to move forward now. But I think the other part I was thinking about, so that's been so strong, is hearing about the Black lives, the people who were here and what they did and how they not only survived but thrived, and against such sort of complete oppression in terms of what their circumstances were, but they just were able to, and so just having those stories come to life and the work that's been done to bring those to life feels so powerful to me. And so I'm just grateful for the work of the trail.
Our programs are really all about getting people together to talk about difficult subjects, things that we find that we often don't say, but we create these safe spaces for people to have these conversations and topics about race, racism, inclusion and oppression. And it's the people who come together that really creates these conversations and create the dynamic conversations that we have, because they come willing to be open. And it's this openness that will move that needle just a little bit further towards a deeper understanding and a better place of being, of recognizing that we're all human and we're all trying to just get to the same place. We're all on a journey. Our journeys are individual, but as a collective, you know, we're trying to get there.